Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to go over some houseplants that are geared more towards the intermediate or experienced indoor gardener. So perhaps you've been growing your plants in your home for a full year now, you've experienced a growing season, you've witnessed a dormant winter season, and you're starting to notice and understand all of the different aspects that there are to plant care, and maybe now you're looking for something a little bit more rewarding and perhaps difficult to grow? Well, don't worry, because I got you covered today. I'm going to share with you guys a bunch of different options that are totally going to fit the bill. So the first group of plants I'm going to talk about today is the, of course, ever so lovely Anthurium. So this one right here is an Anthurium superbum in specific. If you walk into your local houseplant store or big box store, or probably even your grocery store, chances are you're going to find a large handful of the classic flowering Anthurium or flamingo flower, which is Anthurium andreanum. And I could imagine that because those are so common that many houseplant enthusiasts, when they're first starting their houseplant journey, just kind of write those off as houseplants that we don't really bother growing in our homes because they're everywhere. And I can understand that. I didn't grow pothos in my home for like the first 4 years of me indoor gardening because I would see them everywhere and I just deemed them as something that wasn't for me, even though they're like one of the most amazing houseplants out there. Anyway, what I'm saying about that is there are so many other excellent types of anthuriums, and because Anthurium andreanum is so relevant, and then there's all these other anthuriums that have these round, deep green with those silver, like crystalline kind of venation going through the leaves, there is a lot of hype about anthuriums that's a little overrated because there are just so many other foliage anthuriums that are really just so incredible. One of my favorite things about this Anthurium superbum particularly is that if you are perhaps familiar with me and the characteristics that I absolutely love about my houseplants is that these sport this lovely shade of maroonish red on the back sides of the leaves. It's much more prevalent on the newer leaves. This is the newest leaf on my plant right here, but you can see it still is there on the older leaves. It's just much more prevalent on the newest leaf. And you might be able to tell that this plant, if you look inside the soil here, you can see that these roots are very thick and very reminiscent of like a Phalaenopsis orchid or that standard orchid that you would see at the grocery store. And that kind of translates as this being a more epiphytic houseplant. So this is a plant that back when I worked at the houseplant store, I would take a couple of them out of my delivery and I would take them out of their soil and their nursery pots, wrap their roots up with sphagnum moss, and then I would attach them to a wood plank, just like how I mount my staghorn ferns. And I think that these plants, very similar to a staghorn fern, really do have quite the presence when they are mounted up on a wall. I'm sure you can imagine seeing this one just tilted on its side here, that it really is just such a presence, just hanging off the wall in a bundle of moss, and you really get to enjoy these red undersides of the leaves. So perhaps one day I would consider moving mine into a mounted situation because I think it would be something I appreciate a little bit more than it sitting in the pot here. But honestly, as you can also see, being in the planter totally gets the job done. There are just so many wonderful ways to grow your anthuriums. It's up to you to decide how you want to do it. I do have one other anthurium here that I want to share with you guys today that is, I would say, a little bit more popular than the superbum. I would honestly be surprised that when I, like I was saying, worked at the plant store and I would get these in stock, that people weren't like obsessed with them. I think that they're incredibly beautiful, and I think it deserves more of a reputation as those other anthuriums that are totally blown out of the water. This one right here, Anthurium VTI, I know is a little bit more of a popular one in comparison to superbum, which literally makes no sense to me because I think these leaves are a little bit more dynamic, and I'm aware that mine is a much more juvenile houseplant and that these leaves will probably blow me away in a couple of years if I get it to grow to its fullest potential. As you can see the little bits of rippling that this veitchii leaf right here has. It is kind of similar to the superbum, but as this plant matures, these leaves are going to become much longer. They're going to stay a similar width. They will get, you know, a little bit more width to them as they grow larger, but they'll grow more in length. And that is what this plant is primarily popular for. Anthuriums though, why are they on my list today? Why are they more plants for more experienced growers? I have personally struggled with plenty of my anthuriums in my home, and they are something I am still actually learning how to care for. I think a lot of these plants are much more suitable for like a greenhouse condition or like a terrarium setting, which, spoiler alert, that is pretty much what all of the houseplants that I'm going to be talking about in this video have in common, and that's why most of these plants are a little bit more difficult. But this veitchii right here is just a really stunning houseplant. It's held on for me for a couple of years. I believe I've had this one for probably about 2 years. I don't know. I unboxed this plant when I got it, so you could go back and dig for that if you were interested at all, but I really wanted to spotlight these two anthuriums in particular today, superbum and veitchii, because as I was saying, there are a lot of anthuriums out there on Instagram and social media that are just kind of being blown out of proportion. They're a little overrated and they are a hefty price. These two are much more palatable. They're also much easier to care for. In terms of price, both of these cost me around $20. I know veitchii probably costs a little bit more than that now, but I know it's being grown out, like mass produced by plugs. So you'll probably be able to find it for a very reasonable price, but if you've been growing similar plants like philodendron or pothos and you're looking to branch out for something a little bit different, but also very similar, I think anthuriums are perfect, and they're going to give you a very nice prehistoric vibe, which I really appreciate. The next plant I want to talk about today is a real looker. So this is my Piper ornatum, or Piper crocodum. I'm not sure what the more accurate name is. This is very closely related to Peperomia. Both Peperomia and Pipers are in the Piperaceae family, and the genus Piper is actually the genus that includes peppercorns, like the actual peppercorns that we eat. So this is a very closely related plant to peppercorns, which I think is pretty interesting. These leaves are gorgeous. This is probably the most beautiful out there plant that I have in my home. And I will say, I'm not usually like a sucker for pink plants. I think what really gets me though on this plant is that beautiful wine red maroonish color that's on the back side of the leaves. As I was saying, I'm really a sucker for that. So this one really fits me like a glove there. This plant, I have heard from many others, is very difficult to grow inside. I remember when I first got this plant, some people were like commenting very snarkily, being like, you're gonna kill that in a second. Well, it's been like 2.5 years, maybe a little less than that, and this thing has been thriving. Actually, I'm not even sure how long I've had this plant. It could be 3 years, but I think like 2. It really doesn't matter. Anyway, it has flourished for me over the past however long, and I've really had the most luck with this one as far as how I've grown other pipers. I did try growing the peppercorn piper, and that one is very needy when it comes to the watering, and I still have in my possession, although it looks terrible, Piper parmatum, which is just the more darker green-leaved piper that has that really lovely like reptilian but fuzzy foliage. Not the easiest plant to grow. I might try it again, but I don't see myself knocking down doors for it. This one though, since it is absolutely the most stunning piper that I've ever tried growing, I'm thrilled that it has been flourishing for me. I got this as a cutting from one of my friends a while back, and it just had like 3 or 4 leaves on it. I cut off like the lower leaf or 2 to put it in water. It wilted incredibly bad. It looked like it was dying, and then out of nowhere it perked back up. I decided to put it in soil. It wilted again. I thought I was killing it, and then it came back. It's grown a nice long vine. I tried cutting it at this point to see if I could propagate it, and I failed entirely. I'm very fortunate that my first attempt went very well, and since then it's put off this long vine right here. And I will admit, I'm kind of not really feeling this look anymore. Like, I've had this in this planter for, like I said, over 2 years now, and this little trailing spindliness that's going on, while is still beautiful, I think I am going to get more enjoyment out of this plant if I get it up on like a bamboo hoop, now that it's got some real length to it. So I see myself perhaps repotting this before the days get too cold and too dark, but perhaps I might want to just go ahead and wait till the springtime. Anyway, I'm just kind of rambling about me problems with this plant. Let me talk about the plant care. So this plant, as I was saying, just like the anthuriums and many of the other plants that I'm going to be talking about in this video, is known for requiring higher humidity, which is why I'm kind of baffled that I've been able to grow this one outside of an enclosure for so long, keeping in mind that my Piper parmatum has been inside an enclosure since the day I received it, and it still looks terrible. And you will see on this one, I do have a yellow leaf right here. I've actually been a little inconsistent with the watering over the past couple of weeks, I will admit, but I'm going to cross my fingers that I'm a little better on that. I guess that's on me. Anyway, you can see this little yellowing leaf right here, and often when the leaves are yellowing on my plant, I'll just give them a little bit of a tug and see if they're ready to come off. If they're not ready to come off, I will leave it be unless it's driving me crazy aesthetically. But in theory, I feel like it's kind of putting off some of its bad energy, let's say. No, it's overwatered the inconsistency. It's kind of putting that into this leaf and having this leaf like take one for the team for the rest of the plant. So eventually this leaf will expire, but for now, as it seems to be still doing its work that I need it to be doing to keep the rest of my plant so beautiful, I'm just leaving it be, but I'm sure one day I'll go ahead and do the little tug test on it and it'll break free and my plant will look beautiful again. As far as pests go, this one I have found it to be a bit of a pest magnet. I'm sure that's not surprising. I have often found a couple thrips here and there on this plant. In fact, I found a couple while I was looking over this plant earlier, so I will probably have to go ahead and give this a nice clean off with some like Captain Jack spray, or maybe just an alcohol spray like I talked about in my How I Clean My Houseplants video. But because I did find a couple thrips on this, if you're familiar with thrips, it means there's more than that on this plant, so I should take a pretty cautious approach and perhaps use some houseplant systemics in the soil, which I've talked about all of these products in all of my different houseplant pest videos if you are curious. But I think the most important thing with this piper, as I was saying, I've kind of been a little inconsistent with the watering, is that pipers love moisture. Not only do they love moisture in the air, but they love moisture in their soil. This is a plant that I am most likely to water every day. If there is enough water left in the water glass that I'll bring to bed with me at night in the morning, that water is likely going to go in my piper ornatum here because it's just one that I definitely pay the most mind to, but still somehow the pests find it. Also, one thing I want to point out about this plant is why it's probably a little better for intermediate growers is the backside of the leaves. You're probably going to see they're covered in like these little sugar crystals that are both clear and black, and I could imagine that somebody who is just getting into houseplants could like freak out and think their plant is totally infested. They're just sugar crystals. It's totally fine. Do I think that the sugar crystals kind of invite pests? Yeah, I kind of do. That's just my own personal theory. It is not fact, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but yeah, this is a fantastic houseplant, probably more expensive than some of the other plants I want to be talking about today, but it's just really so gorgeous and really one that has been very reliable for me. Like I said, people might have different experiences based on the comments I've seen in my videos. I just would not recommend ordering this from far away. I could see this as a plant not shipping very well if the cutting that I took from 30 minutes away barely lasted. I don't see this shipping very well as just a cutting. So buy an established plant or get a cutting from a friend or anything like that, but it's such a gorgeous houseplant. I really wish this was one that was a little bit more readily available, but something tells me the way the plant market's been going that give it a year or two and suddenly that might just be one of the filled engine Birkins that we see every day now. So what do I want to talk about next? I want to talk about this next. So fair warning, this plant, I should have watered it like 2 days ago, so it's a little wilty, but I think it still looks amazing and it'll look totally fine once I go ahead and water it. Anyway, this is a begonia, and I'm going to lump like all begonias into this category today because they're not beginner houseplants. I can't think of one begonia off the top of my head where I'm like, that would be great for a beginner. I'm pretty sure any begonia would make a beginner gardener run for the hills. This one right here is a begonia natunaensis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't think I'm ever gonna pronounce it right. This is one that I got from Steve's Leaves in my last Steve's Leaves unboxing video. And I am admittedly like not so sure about me and myself and growing begonias. I love begonias, they're gorgeous. I wish I could grow a bunch of begonias in the same way I wish I could grow a bunch of ferns and I wish I could grow a bunch of ficus, but these aren't the most forgiving houseplants. This one, I received it. I put it underneath a glass cloche in my kitchen, so it's not even remotely near my window or even a light source. And it's been growing incredibly for me. It's bone dry right now. You can see it's still handling the drought very well in terms of these leaves are still very upright and not flopping over in the way that these lower ones are a little floppy. But these have kind of been just low hangers ever since they've gotten a little too large and gravity has been kind of playing its job, doing its job. So begonias in most cases they're just very needy. They require a lot of water, they require a lot of humidity. There are a lot of begonias out there that really do require like a terrarium greenhouse setting. So as I said, I put this one underneath a glass cloche. I'm considering removing it from that glass cloche because it's becoming a little too big and I don't have another glass cloche big enough for this one or a terrarium. So what I'm considering doing to wean this one out of the glass cloche is I'll give it a good water today after, and then perhaps I'm going to situate like a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag that's clear over the top of my plant, and I'll leave it open to vent versus the glass closure was completely enclosed. So how many times am I gonna say glass closure? It's already a very hard phrase to say, let me tell you. Anyway, that's going to kind of wean this one off of that super high humidity, introduce it to an environment that still has high enough humidity but isn't going to be as high, and then maybe in like 2 or 3 weeks I can go ahead, pull the plastic bag off, and I will maybe have my Begonia natuensis living outside of the glass. We'll see. Wish me luck. I'm kind of nervous. It looks really, really good even when it's a little wilty right now, so I would like it to stay looking as good, but these leaves are just really, really beautiful with those just slight red hues and all of those little just kind of crevices. It's really cool. A very also interesting begonia. I think the natuensis is much more inexpensive. I think this one was probably like $10, $15 on Steve's Leaves. And I have this other one here that is still inside the glass, and I apologize because I know my lights are probably not going to be able to make this visible to you guys. But this is a begonia melanobullata. This is a more collector begonia. I think this one probably costs more around like the $40 to $50 mark. And this is one that I would never consider removing it from the glass cloche in the way that I'm like, I think I'm gonna wean my natuensis off it. This one, no, it's living in here forever. And this is a really funky begonia. I really doubt you guys can see. Maybe I'll give you guys a close-up otherwise, but this begonia has some really out there leaves that have these almost like pimple-like structures that are all over it, and they have little like hair follicles coming out, and they also just have some nice red splotches all over the leaves. So this is just a really funky variety of begonia. And as you get to these more collector begonias, they just have a lot of character, and they're really, really cool, and it's something that I really want to get myself much more into. However, I'm just going to need to get a lot more terrariums because, like I said, a lot of these are just a little bit more on the finicky side. They just require the trim, like I was saying. My spoiler at the beginning of this video. A lot of these plants need a terrarium setting. Begonias, in most cases, are the ones that are going to require that. There are plenty of other begonias that you can grow outside a terrarium. A lot of the more like cane begonias, like the Begonia maculata is probably the most popular begonia on the market currently. That is one I've never found myself needing to grow it inside a glass cloche, but does it require more humidity than a standard golden pothos or ZZ plant? 100%. The next group of plants I want to talk about today is a family of plants, but I'm only going to talk about one today because I'm obviously rambling. But this is a Primolina sinensis, but Primolina isn't necessarily the plants I'm talking about today. I'm referring to a large group of plants, the family of plants of Gesneriaceae, or Gesneriads, which is a group of plants or a family of plants that includes many common houseplants such as the African violet or the acacia or the lipstick plant. This is one that's just a little bit more out there, and I feel like I've probably talked about this particular plant in a couple of videos where I'm talking about plants that I consider to be underrated or ones that deserve more attention. Primolinas are incredible. I'm going to houseplant stores and I'm seeing these pretty much every time, and I just don't think people know what they are. And they have such beautiful foliage, and they're really nice and fuzzy. It's very fuzzy, similar to like a spiderwort or like my Sideraceous fuscata, which is one of my new favorite houseplants. This gives me a very, very similar vibe to that. And even though this foliage is just completely stunning, Gesneriads are actually grown mostly for their flowers or their blooms. So you can actually see right here, probably not because I don't think I'm gonna be able to show you guys, but down here inside this little crevice here close to the crown of the plant is this little flower bud. So that's going to come up probably about 3 or 4 inches above the plant and have this dainty little whitish, purplish flower, maybe bluish. I've seen a bunch of different colors in these Primolinas, although I believe this one is a whitish, purplish flower. And it's just gonna be hanging above, and it's just gonna be a nice little accent to this already beautiful houseplant. So this one, I don't think I said the common name of Primolinas. They're commonly called Asian violets, so it's fun that they're very closely related to African violets, which are of course native to Africa, and these are native to Asia. I can't help but wonder why Asian violets are so much more lesser known than African violets given the stunning foliage that they have. And there are so many varieties of Primolinas. This is just one variety right here. There are so many different ones that have even more like enigmatic foliage, larger leaves, smaller leaves, so many different varieties in the same way that there's so many different types of African violets. But I feel like most African violet foliage looks very, very similar with just like little nuanced differences, while Primolinas look like entirely different. You can just tell that they're like the same plant in a similar way that like peperomias and Hoyas all look kind of the same, but also look completely different. One of the main reasons why I am including Gesneriads on my more experienced intermediate gardener plant list is of course, because of their care. There are definitely things about these plants that make them much more difficult to grow than the standard house plant. The most important thing I would say with these is the water temperature. I think this is something that's not going to really apply to any of the other plants that I'm talking about today. I guess begonias can kind of fall into this category. I could be wrong. But these for certain, and Gesneriads across the board, I would be pretty careful of this, is to not get cold water on the leaves. They will not handle it very well at all, and they will get some pretty ugly brown markings on them. But also, along with that, is to make sure that if perhaps you are using lukewarm water or warm water and you are still going kind of willy-nilly with watering over top of the leaves, make sure that these aren't going to be sitting in the sun, because that sun and the water on the leaves is also going to damage the leaves. So best to not get these leaves wet. You'll often hear with African violets particularly to bottom water them, where you would just place your planter inside a bowl of water or a tray of water and it'll suck it up from the bottom up, and then you'll be able to tell when your plant is well watered because the soil on top, which is dry right now, would be wet. And this is something that is going to work particularly with terracotta planters and also plastic planters that have holes in the bottom. It's not going to work as well with a ceramic planter that has a built-in tray or something like that. You would probably be better just to carefully top water that, but if you are very worried about affecting the leaves of your plant, I would keep that in mind. But I would just say to just be mindful. It's something that I am not the most mindful person of. I'm definitely just watering this with the watering can kind of willy-nilly, but I just make sure to kind of go into a little crack right like this side right here and just let it go in, besides watering it from this side where it's likely going to pour over the leaves. So not something you have to be incredibly careful of, but just do keep it in mind. And I'm sure you can imagine if they don't like cold water, they don't love cold drafts either. So this is just one I keep always like 6 feet away from the window, just because it's not even one that's going to require a high amount of sun. Your Gesneriads are going to do best in the medium indirect light areas of your home, even pushing on the lower light areas of your home. So it's just best to keep them away from those bright, scorching, sunny windows for many reasons. And as far as the whole humidity and like greenhouse setting goes, I think that Gesneriads are going to be a little bit more forgiving than many of the other plants I'm talking about today. There are definitely some Gesneriads that they require a terrarium setting. A lot of Apicias are coming to mind for me right now that are just, they need that high humidity, but I would say the more forgiving Gesneriads definitely include Primolinas, St. Paulias, which are African violets, and Aschenanthus, or lipstick plant, is also a great option too. That's one that probably isn't often thought to be a Gesneriad. That one has much more of a Hoya appearance. But I've just noticed that a lot of newer plant enthusiasts just don't really seem to notice Gesneriads, and it seems to be something that people who are more, have been growing plants for more years, it's something that they seem much more interested in. But new gardeners don't seem to care at all. Anyway, they're fantastic. Give a Gesneriad a go, you're not going to regret it. The last group of plants I want to talk about today is the family of prayer plants, which is also called the Marantaceae family. And this one in particular is a Stromanthe Sanguinea Triostar. And this, in my opinion, is the most beautiful prayer plant that is out there. And that's saying a lot, because there is a lot of prayer plants out there and they are all so stunning. I know prayer plants are something that beginner gardeners are going to walk into a plant store for probably the first time, and they're going to see it and they're going to want to buy it. And I can't tell you how often when I worked at the plant store, I was telling people, do not buy this plant. And it wasn't because I didn't want them to buy it, it's because I didn't want them to have a bad experience with plants, especially if they're just starting out. These are much more geared towards an intermediate or experienced gardener, perhaps even advanced, because I am not really having good luck with them lately. I know that I talked about this plant, in this one particularly, in a video I did in probably the last 6 months that was like, plants I would never buy again, or house plants I don't grow anymore. I forget the title, but those are all getting the point across. Do I stand by that still? I mean, I haven't bought a prayer plant since then, so I guess kind of. However, my success with this one and my other 2 prayer plants that I've had in my home, minding you that I at one point had like 25 different types of prayer plants in my home, and now I have 3, and it's not because I gave them away, it's because they died very harsh deaths. Prayer plants are so susceptible to pests. That's like the #1 thing about them. Every other Stromanthe I've grown in the past, and this is like my 4th Stromanthe, maybe even 5th that I've tried out, they all get spider mites terribly. And more recently, I'm finding that they also get mealybugs. This one had a mealybug bout. I know I featured this in my last main upload. And my Calathea orbifolia, which is my largest prayer plant, also does deal with mealybug. Fortunately, the mealybug is much more, it's less aggressive than the spider mites. The spider mites annihilate the foliage and they turn these really beautiful leaves into just yellow splotchy messes. And not only that, I think the biggest deal that I have with prayer plants is that their leaves are just so gorgeous and they're so finicky and they're so quick to turn like brown or yellow that once this gorgeous red, green, pink, white leaf gets a little bit of brown or yellow on it, it just looks so bad and I'm just like not feeling it. And I like my plants to have like a little bit of character, mind you, but this is a work of art and I can't have it be ruined. So what causes your prayer plants to turn brown? There are plenty of different things. Stress first and foremost, from just moving a plant from a greenhouse to being shipped 6 days on a truck in a box to a plant store to immediately being brought to your house and maybe repotted in a planter. That is not going to do your prayer plant very good. When you bring home your prayer plants, I would recommend leaving them be in the plastic nursery planter that you buy it in for perhaps a full growing season if you can wait that long, and just putting it inside a planter and just staging it in there. But the minimum, like 2 weeks, if you are going through the growing season or if it's a gift or something, I feel you. You might have to do it, but don't buy a prayer plant for a gift. Just skip that. As much as I'm sure someone would love a prayer plant as a gift because they are gorgeous, they're not gonna love it when it's dead in a week's time because they're probably not gonna have any idea what they're doing with it. So the other things about this plant is that they're very susceptible to low humidity, as is kind of the theme for this video. So your prayer plants, if you are not giving them adequate humidity, they are going to get some brown edges to the leaves, so the sides of the leaves are gonna get brown. And then also, these plants do not do well with like the impurities that are in the tap water, so like chlorine and bromine and fluoride and stuff. So they are going to be expelling or transpiring out the water, and they can't get rid of these little impurities. So they're going to be stuck inside the plant at the tips of the leaves, and they're going to turn brown. And as you can see here, it's not the most amazing thing. Just a little bit of brown I can deal with. Like, this leaf is fine. But if it gets a little bit worse, we might have to consider getting the shears out and removing it just to keep this plant looking ever so gorgeous. And this one has a little bit more thicker leaves. There are other like Calatheas that have much more thinner leaves, or Marantas. Maranta like Leucanera, with the standard prayer plant that you're going to find at the plant store. That's probably the most likely one to be referred to as a prayer plant. Those leaves are so paper thin and they turn brown so quickly. So buyer beware. Just saying. But am I considering trying out some more prayer plants in the next couple months? Perhaps. I'm starting to find out the better ways to grow them. I'm starting to learn how they really do need time to acclimate. You might bring them home and they might get some leaves that turn ugly pretty quickly, but then they might put off some new leaves. That's exactly what was happening with my Calathea mosaica, which is the third and final prayer plant that I have in my home. But there are just so many beautiful prayer plants out there. Like I said, this is the plant that people are probably going to walk into a houseplant for their first time and feel like they have to bring it home because they've never seen a plant so beautiful before. And just do your best to steer them away from that and get them to get a ZZ plant or a Syndapsis instead, something else that's going to look quite beautiful, but just not give the bad taste in your mouth that a prayer plant is going to give a beginner gardener. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Houseplants that are more geared towards the intermediate experienced gardener. There are plenty of houseplants out there that maybe you struggled with in your first year of gardening that maybe perhaps you should give a second go now that you have a little bit more experience under your belt. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.